Good day and welcome. Today I'm going to talk about A Fire Upon the Deep, a 1992 novel from Vernor Vinge. Um, this is actually an interesting novel because it is set in a it is a science fiction novel that's set in the future and examines some of the implications of the internet. But in 1992, the web was still in its infancy, and so the bulk of internet traffic came from Usenet. So the internet, or the relay, as he calls it, the the web of the net of a thousand lies, net of a million lies, um, is like a Usenet feed. And for those of you that don't know what Usenet is, it was a giant message board that was divided into groups, and then there were individual relay points where I would post something and then it would get sent up to the next relay and then propagate it out, and then that would take however long that took. So you'd sometimes get traffic out of order where someone near you would post something and you'd see it in 5 minutes, whereas someone on the other side of the world it might take 20 or 30 minutes to propagate out. And Vinci really captures that in A Fire Upon the Deep. So when you look at what would the internet be like for spacefaring communities, um, Fire Upon the Deep really captures that. The other thing I think of modern life that it really captures is the idea of having the internet and the ability to do things over networks, but the network is just for data transmission. The network is not particularly for physical transactions and physical transfers. So you have the data is flowing really quickly, but physically things can take a while to get delivered, which I think really is a message that we can kind of relate to in our modern world. Now, Vinci is a transhumanist, and a lot of his work deals with, well, he tries to, in a lot of his work, deal with what is it like when humans transcend humanity and become like gods. And I was reading kind of the introductions in one of his earlier books of short stories, and his editors keep telling him, please stop trying to publish this. You can't imagine what humanity is like when they're gods, because you're not a god yourself. You can't write about someone who's more advanced than you. Which, okay, there are elements of truth to that, and it's obviously possible. The entire genre of science fiction is attempts to write, let's say this new technology appears, how would the world change? Nevertheless, um, so when he talks about transhumanism, one of the interesting concepts in A Fire Upon the Deep is what they call the zones of thought. So you have inside the galaxies where the stars are more dense, and because of the density of stars, your IQ can only go so high. As you move out of the galaxy and towards the Magellanic Clouds and where the stars are less dense, then the level of intelligence that's available changes. And your intelligence, also, you being whoever, goes up. So, when you move out of what's called the slow zones, or the area inside the galaxy, into the beyond, then people become smarter, better able to think, etc. And then eventually you get far enough away, you get into what's called the transcendence, which is where people are capable of transcending humanity and becoming like gods. And he kind of sidesteps the problem of what's going to happen when all these people transcend, by saying, well, gods, you know they'll be engaged for 10 to 15 years, and then they'll go off and start doing something, start getting uh, focused on, very internally focused and not externally focused. So there are gods and people who transcend, but they're not generally involved in the affairs of humanity. And I use humanity in the sense of all of the races, um, because humans are just one of many races that are in this particular story. So the net of the story is humanity goes out into the beyond, and it discovers a trapped computer program which then, because you're in the beyond and because intelligence is so high, and in addition, available technology is so high, computer networks reach the point where they become transcendent, beyond AI. And this particular transcendent piece of programming is able to suborn humanity and essentially mind control them. And so the story deals with the focus in the beyond of the people who are out there that have to deal with what humanity has unleashed. And then there's a group of humans who are who think there might be a countermeasure that can enable them to um, stop the transcendent being, and so they're trying to find it. And then meanwhile, there's, you know, the main thing is the net of the million lies. So there's this constant, chatter back and forth, and people are watching what's going on, but they're not participating. They're just, shit posting really. So it's a really good mixture. There's a lot of science and human transcendence, and what happens when creatures become more powerful. Um, but then also there's a human story about a chase to find something. So overall, again, it's enjoyable to read. It's interesting. Um, the characters are interesting. One of them, Pham Nguyen, shows up in A Deepness in the Sky, which is kind of a sequel to the story, but it isn't exactly. And the whole story of how he comes about is actually really fascinating. Um, So it's a good story. It examines, transcendence and humanity, and how does technology enable us, and the mixture of man and technology, and what powers they have, and powers a god might have. And then, well, that's really that's the bulk of the story. It's fun to read. And it talks a lot about aging of computer systems, which in 1992 wasn't really a big deal. But one of the things that they're talking about there, Ravna and Pham go to a bar where they meet two Scroder riders, and they're talking about old databases that have 8 layers of translation across them, and you don't even know what's in the original database because there's 8 different translation layers on it. So for example, if you were to take, not that this happens, but there's um, a database in ancient Greek, which then has a Latin layer on top of it that translates Greek into Latin. And then you translate the Latin into, say, Old French, which then gets translated into modern French. And then you're trying to read it in English. So, what does the ancient Greek database really say? Well, you're not sure. And so some of the problems inherent in older computer systems, computer archaeology, are um, related to this. How do you and there's some interesting questions, and he examines. I'll call it computer archaeology, and the one of the funnier comments I remember reading is there's a pursuit going on, and temporarily. One of the things is that if you're in the beyond, you can do faster than light travel, but in the slow zones, it's not possible. And these characters end up in the slow zone, and they're working on the automation on their ship to make the automation more efficient, because there's 3 people running a full spaceship. And one of the characters comments that half-assed programming, like knitting, is a time waster that dates to the beginning of the human experience. And from our perspective, you think, well, knitting and half-assed programming, I mean, knitting's been a thing for thousands of years, but programming is relatively new. But to the perspective of these people, they're both things from the distant past. And that line has always struck with me as very interesting. So Vernor Vinge, very good story, focused a lot around transcendence of humanity and what that means and how that impacts people, but also a good story about people trying to find something and prevent an evil from spreading. So overall, recommend. Once again, if you did make it this far, thank you very much for your time, and I will talk to you later.